Привет, товарищ меня, Красной Army 1. Hello, comrades, my name is Red Army 1. Now, today, because it's Tuesday, we've started the new segment, Tactics Tuesday. So every Tuesday, I'll talk about a certain tactic or battle in history that has taken place, and this will be anything from antiquity, Romans and Greek and Hittites and Egyptians, all the way till pretty well now. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Comment a battle or a tactic you want to hear about, and I'll see what I can do. But for today's video, we're going to be talking about the great tactic, which I love, which is Blitzkrieg. For those of you who don't know what Blitzkrieg is, it is simply lightning war in German. And the reason why it's called that is because it's a fast-paced war. It is just all about speed, proper coordination, power, and just pretty well how fast you can advance into enemy territory. The Germans invented this tactic in the Second World War. This was shown very easily and very prominently in the invasion of the lowland countries, so Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and Denmark, all those types of places. It proved itself really as a tactic. Coordinated tanks, aircraft, artillery, and infantry movements all in one, just to push through and steamroll over the enemy. Brilliant tactic. As we all know, in September 1st, 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland, and the Russians invaded Poland as well, the Allies were like, hey, you can't do that, we'll step in if you invade Poland, which Germans did and the Russians did. So at the time, Germany and Russia were allies. That's a separate thing. But at the time, the Allies were like, well, you've invaded, we're going to war. Pretty well nothing happened, nothing exciting happened from September of 1939 until about January, February of 1940. There was some firing along the Western Front and Maginot Line and that between Belgium, English, and French forces, but it wasn't really. It was like World War I stalemate. You don't attack them. If they attack you, you shoot them, but you don't go out and attack them. It's stupid. What else? Not until about May, June, July-ish when the Germans launched Blitzkrieg into Belgium and France did anything happen. Until then, pretty well, the three armies of the Allies, Belgium, France, and England, were just sitting around, just waiting for the attack, sitting around like, well, Germans are over there, we're here, nothing's going on. And then suddenly in early June, the Germans just bashed through the weakest point in the Maginot Line, which had the British Expeditionary Force and the French stationed along it. They steamrolled through Belgium with this, and I'll just show you in this little diagram. Pretty well how it went was from Germany in the weakest bit here. The Army Group B, A, and C steamrolled through Belgium, and then they went into France. Army Group C sort of pushed these two units downwards. Army Group A advanced towards Paris, and then Army Group B pushed the English all the way back to eventually Dunkirk. And that was in the early days. That held out for a while, and then the Germans swung down to the south. They left this part to other German forces in the south, and they would come in and link up with Army Group C later. Army Group A by this time had captured Paris and kept pushing the French back, as Army Group B just continued its slow, steady advance all the way to Dunkirk. Eventually, some of Army Group A and Army Group B would link up at Dunkirk and push the French and English out of France entirely. Just a little bit of sort of knowledge, I guess, for you, for comparison of the armies. The German army itself had a total amount of 7,378 guns, artillery pieces, massed along the Maginot Line until the attack. They had 2,445 tanks, mainly Panzer Mark I and Mark IVs. They had, from the new created Air Force Luftwaffe, 5,638 aircraft, primarily Me-109s, dive bombers, Stukas, and heavy bombers. And they had, through all of this, this combined plus regular infantry, 3,350,000 troops. 3,350,000 troops. Whereas the Allies, primarily the French at this time with the English, had 13,974 guns, artillery pieces, 3,383 tanks, primarily I can't remember the model of them, but the British had the Churchill tanks, and the French had, I can't remember the name of them, but they're pretty well oval shaped with a little bulb turret and like a 50mm gun on top. I can't remember what they're called. Mainly, those ones were used for infantry support. And then the combined Allied air forces together with France and England numbered 2,935 planes. 2,935. Primarily English Spitfires, and then there was the French model aircraft. And then troops altogether for the French and English were 3,300,000. 3,300,000. Now, Germany at this time just has a bit more manpower than the Allies, and they have a substantial amount of aerial support compared to that of the Allies. Tank-wise, the Allies do have more, but it comes down to just simple way to use them, tactics, how they're built. The German tanks are obviously superior. They have thick armor, but they do go very fast, and they have powerful 54mm main guns, whereas the English Churchills and the French tanks, they're more infantry support. At this time, in early stages of the war, the English and the French don't really know how to use the tank properly. The French especially. I can't remember the name of the tank, but the French tank, there were so many of primarily the French tanks, but the French never used them for anything to bash through trench lines or infantry lines or anything. They used them primarily for infantry support. Even though they were heavily armored, they could definitely combat any panzer and things like that, at least as a defensive weapon, not as an offense, but they could completely take on the panzers. But the French just didn't use them as effectively as they could, so that's one of the reasons why they wound up getting pushed back. Artillery pieces, 13,974, incredible amount of artillery pieces compared to the Germans. But that also came down to where they're placed along the front. Primarily, they're fortified in the southern bit of the heavy Maginot Line, not so much along the northern, weaker part. So that's kind of what you might say had done them in, and I'll get on to that in a moment. Casualty-wise, the Germans, by the end of the French campaign, had casualties numbering 163,650, whereas the Allies had 360,000. 360,000, primarily French troops and English troops. 360,000 from the British Expeditionary Force and the regular French army. That is a substantial amount in itself. Pretty well almost a good 3 times that of the German casualties. And pretty well all these factors here for guns, tanks, air, and troops, the Germans, because of Blitzkrieg, they've worked it out where they all sync up. They all sync up. The artillery launches bombardments for however long they need. Then the Air Force may come in. Stukas might dive bomb down. Boom, boom, boom. Bombers will come in. And then when the bombers clear away, that gives the enemy line a bit weak for tanks to just roll on through, shoot up the place, keep going, and infantry can come up, clean up whatever's left behind, and keep going. Whereas the Allies at the time, heavily defensive, their guns, where they're placed in, because they're placed so far south at the fortified Maginot Line, where the Germans had attacked in 1914, they thought the Germans would come through there again. So that's why they're placed so to the south, and not very many along the northern, weaker border of Belgium, etc. Tank-wise, as I said, they do have more, the French and the British, but the French just don't really know how to use them. Had they have coordinated effectively and done more drills and practices and things like that, they definitely could have defended against the German Blitzkrieg. Air Force, again, as I said, it's primarily the French Air Force, but there are about almost 1/4, maybe half of which is British Spitfires and bombers and things like that. The Spitfire is a good plane. It's just they're outnumbered by the Stukas and Me-109s. That's the simple mathematics to it. 2,935 is incredibly less than 5,638. So you could have maybe 2 Spitfires patrolling an area, giving cover fire and things to troops below, but the Germans at that time might not have enough infantry at that point, but they might have 10 Stukas and 10 Me-109s flying overhead to come in and combat those 2 Spitfires and the infantry below. So that's a substantial factor, I find. And then, of course, we have the Germans with 3,350,000 men along their front for the attack, and the British and French with 3,300 along the line of defense. It's just that sliver. And you may think, oh, well, you know, that little sliver is important. Yes, it is, but at the same time, not really. With the coordination itself of the attack, they could have gone even probably with lesser troops and still beaten the Allies, because Blitzkrieg as well is all about encirclement, diversionary attacks, punching through, keep going, just all about speed, speed, speed. You know, once you've broken through the enemy line, don't stop, don't wait to set up, you know, like perimeters and things. Keep going as far as you can go. The rest of the army will follow you, you know, whereas many other armies around the world at the time were still thinking World War I standards, where you take ground, you hold it, you build up slowly, 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 then you attack, see what happens. If not, you build up slowly, 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 you attack, see what happens, and that continual pattern. Blitzkrieg changes all of this because it's just to catch you off guard. When you are at rest, the enemy comes through and boom, smashes through, and before you know it, your whole country is taken. Whereas the British and French, as I've said, just they kind of didn't know how to combat Blitzkrieg. It's a completely new way of warfare. The British and French, as if they were to launch an offensive at the Germans, it would primarily be like almost like a D-Day scenario. They would advance, keep going, stop, set up perimeters and things, get the army there, advance, stop, get the rest of the army there, keep going, and like piece by piece, inching forward. Whereas the Germans, it's just steamroll, keep going, we'll clean up after, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that about wraps it up for today's tactical topic for Tuesday. If you have a certain tactic you want to hear about from me or have me talk about for you, maybe you're doing a school project or something, let me know in the comments below, that sort of thing. I don't have an idea yet for next Tuesday's tactic, so I'll have to think of something, but until next time, you know, have fun, keep collecting if you're a collector, keep doing reenactments if you're a reenactor, that sort of thing. And I think we're pretty well done. So until next time, comrades, Red Army 1 signing off.